I never thought I'd end up living alone in such a big house. It was an old, sprawling property with more history than I could take in. After my divorce, it seemed like the perfect place to start fresh, quiet, secluded, and with plenty of space to reorganize my life. I bought the house just over 6 months ago and had been trying to turn it into something that felt like home. But you know those places that feel like they carry memories that aren't yours? The house was like that. The first sign was the smell in the basement, a strange odor that seemed to come out of nowhere, like something between rusty metal and wet earth. I thought it might be mold, maybe caused by the dampness. At the time, I didn't pay much attention. The basement was the kind of place you avoid exploring. It was full of boxes left behind by the previous owners, with an abandoned feel that unsettled me. There was a creaky wooden staircase that groaned in protest every time I went down. In the first few weeks, I went down there a couple of times to organize things, but I never bothered looking too closely. It was just a functional space, nothing more. Until one day, I noticed something strange. Some boxes weren't where I'd left them. I figured maybe I'd just been distracted. It's easy to get confused with so much on my mind. But the smell was stronger. And that's when I noticed something else. A door that, I was sure, hadn't been there before. It was a dark, heavy wooden door with an old-fashioned lock that looked like it belonged in a movie. There were scratch marks on the outside, as if someone had tried to open it, or lock something inside. It made no sense. I'd never noticed that door before, and I was almost certain it hadn't been there the first few times I organized the basement. I called the realtor, trying to figure out what was going on, but he assured me there was nothing unusual about the house when it was sold. Maybe it was just a trick of memory, I thought. Maybe I just hadn't noticed it. Still, the whole thing left me uneasy. Over the weeks, I tried to ignore the door. After all, who cares about a door in the basement, right? But little things kept happening. Sometimes I'd find tools out of place, even though I hadn't used them. Once, I heard a muffled sound, like a faint creak coming from down there. When I went to check, everything was silent except for the groaning stairs beneath my feet. The smell, which had been just a mild annoyance, became almost unbearable, like something rotten mixed with rust. I was starting to lose sleep, creating absurd theories in my head. It was as if the basement was alive. Or worse, as if I wasn't the only one living in the house. Everything changed that Saturday night. I was in the living room, trying to relax with a movie, when I heard a sound coming from the basement. It wasn't just another creak or random noise. It was continuous, muffled, like someone murmuring or trying to speak through something. My heart raced. I froze for a few seconds, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind or an old pipe. But the noise didn't stop. It only got clearer. I grabbed a flashlight, my hands trembling, and went down the stairs. The smell was overwhelming. When I reached the bottom, I saw the door was slightly ajar. I was absolutely certain it had been locked before. I approached slowly, every step a battle against the panic building inside me. When I got close enough, I heard something that froze me in place. A whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was unmistakably a voice. A human voice. I stepped back instinctively, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but the morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I slammed the door shut and twisted the lock as hard as I could. Then I ran up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But that night, even with all the lights in the house on, I couldn't sleep. The next day, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. I opened every window in the house, letting the air circulate, as if that could clear out the basement smell or the dark thoughts clouding my mind. But by the end of the day, I couldn't resist. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage and went back down, determined to open that door once and for all and put the mystery to rest. My breathing echoed in the closed space, and the smell was worse than ever, almost like it had soaked into the walls. When I reached the door, I hesitated. The lock had fresh marks on it, as if someone on the other side had tried to force it. I don't know if it was adrenaline or sheer desperation, but I attacked the lock with the crowbar until it gave way with a loud snap. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark corridor. There shouldn't have been anything there. The house's blueprints didn't show any extra spaces beyond the basement. My heart pounded as I shone the flashlight into the space. The corridor was made of rough stone, like something much older than the rest of the house. Every step I took made the concrete floor creak, and the air grew heavier, damp, almost unbreathable. At the end of the corridor, there was another door. This one looked even older, with rusted hinges and symbols carved into the wood that I didn't recognize. I had to fight the urge to turn back. But something pulled me forward, as if I couldn't stop. With every step toward the second door, I felt my entire body tense, as if something invisible was watching me. My flashlight started to flicker, the beam cutting in and out, which only made my anxiety worse. When I finally reached the door, I noticed it didn't have a handle, just a circular opening in the middle, like it was meant to be pushed or pulled with force. I pressed my ear to it, hesitating for a moment, and I heard something on the other side. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a low, rhythmic sound, almost like deep breathing. My stomach turned, and for the first time since this all began, I seriously thought about turning back and forgetting everything. But the curiosity was like a weight pulling me forward, forcing me to keep going. With both hands, I pushed the door as hard as I could. It opened slowly, groaning as if it hadn't been moved in decades. What I saw on the other side was something I could never have imagined. It was a small room, lit only by a faint yellowish glow that seemed to come from candles, though I couldn't see any. In the center of the room was an old, almost rotting chair, and sitting on it was a doll. But it wasn't an ordinary doll. It was made of rough fabric with stitched eyes and a wide, red-painted smile. The most disturbing part? The doll was facing a broken mirror, its shards reflecting different angles of the room, making it feel like I was being watched from every direction. The air seemed to hum with a strange vibration, an invisible energy pressing against my skin. For a few moments I stood there, trying to process what it all meant. None of it made sense. It felt like I'd stepped into another world, completely separate from the rest of the house. The room was suffocating, the air thick with something that wasn't just mold. As I took a step closer to the chair, the floor beneath me felt icy cold, and I noticed something scratched into the wood near the doll. Words, crudely carved, hard to make out in the dim light, but I managed to read them. She watches. Do not touch. My heart raced, but before I could react, I heard a sound behind me. A whisper, faint but clear, coming from every direction at once. I spun around so fast that I nearly dropped the flashlight, but there was nothing there. When I turned back to the doll, I swear its stitched eyes were now pointed directly at me, as if it had shifted. Panic gripped me, and all I could think about was getting out of that room as quickly as possible. But as I tried to step back, I tripped over something, a red cord stretched across the floor like a trap. I fell backward, and in that moment, the mirror in front of me shattered completely, without anyone touching it. It felt like the room was reacting to my presence. I got up as fast as I could, ignoring the pain in my back and the overwhelming fear threatening to paralyze me. All I could think about was escaping. I turned to the door, but it was closed. I didn't remember closing it, and the idea that someone, or something, had done it while I was inside made my heart feel like it was going to stop. I ran to it, trying to push it open, but it wouldn't budge. The flashlight in my hand flickered erratically, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It was a reflection in the broken mirror, a shadow, something there that shouldn't be. I screamed out of instinct, but my voice sounded muffled, as if the space was swallowing the sound. That's when the scratching started on the door behind me. At first, it was soft, like nails lightly dragging across the wood. Then it grew louder, more insistent, as if it was trying to force its way in. My hands trembled as I pulled at the door with all my strength, but it wouldn't give. The smell of rust and decay was unbearable now, stinging my eyes and making them water. In that moment, I thought I was going to die there. Then, out of nowhere, the scratching stopped. A heavy silence fell over the room, thick and oppressive. And then I heard it. A voice, low and close, whispering right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." Those words echoed in my head like a scream. My legs gave out, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air, as if the room itself was draining it away. But then, as if in a final act of desperation, my hand found the crowbar I'd brought with me. Without thinking, I started smashing the door with all my strength, ignoring the sound of something moving behind me. Every hit reverberated through the room, but it seemed to work. After what felt like an eternity, the wood gave way, and I managed to open the passage. The corridor was there, but it felt different, narrower, darker, almost like it had shifted. Without looking back, I ran as fast as I could, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. I reached the basement, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the basement door shut and locking it behind me. I pressed my back against it, trying to calm myself, but the sounds didn't stop. On the other side, something was banging on the door, first softly, then harder. It was as if it was trying to follow me. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and called the police. They arrived quickly, but when they checked the basement, it was empty. The door I had broken down was intact, as if it had never been opened. One of the officers, skeptical, told me it was probably my imagination. But I knew it wasn't. There was something in that basement, something I was never supposed to find. After that night, I never went back into the basement. I hired a company to clear out everything, including the old boxes from the previous owners. I didn't care what they found. All I wanted was to get rid of anything connected to that place. But even after everything was removed, the smell lingered. It was faint, but it was still there, like a reminder that some things can't be erased. For weeks, I slept with the lights on, locking every door in the house. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Some nights, I would wake up convinced I'd heard footsteps coming from downstairs. I sold the house 3 months later, without mentioning anything to the new buyer. It wasn't something I could explain rationally, and maybe, deep down, I just wanted to forget. I moved into a small apartment. No basement, no attic, no room for mysteries. To this day, I don't know what I found in that room or what might have been living there. But one thing I do know, that phrase, "You shouldn't have come here," still echoes in my mind. Sometimes I wonder if I truly escaped, or if somehow it's still with me, waiting for the right moment to show itself again. My parents never left me home alone, but that weekend, they didn't have a choice. It was an important trip, and since I was already 16, I thought it would be fine. It was early October, and the days were getting shorter, which always made me a little uneasy about the house. It wasn't exactly old, but it had this heavy silence when it was empty. Without my parents around, the place felt even bigger, as if the hallways and rooms had doubled in size. I spent most of Saturday watching TV and playing video games, trying to ignore the small creaks and noises that seemed to come from everywhere. It was just paranoia, I thought, until I noticed the man in the backyard. I was in the kitchen grabbing something to eat when my eyes wandered to the window overlooking the yard. He was there, a man, standing near the fence, staring straight at the house. He didn't look nervous or lost, and he definitely wasn't someone from the neighborhood. He was wearing a worn-out brown coat, and his face looked weathered, almost expressionless. I froze for a few seconds, wondering what he wanted. I tried convincing myself that maybe he was looking for a lost dog or something, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. After a while, I decided to ignore it. I closed the curtains, locked the door, and went back to the living room, convincing myself he would go away. After all, Why would someone just stand there, staring at a teenager's house? I tried distracting myself with video games, but I couldn't get that image out of my head. Every time I heard leaves rustling or wood creaking outside, my eyes darted to the window. About an hour later, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to peek again. Carefully, I opened a small gap in the curtain. He was still there. Same spot, same stance, staring straight at the house. It was like he knew I was watching because his eyes seemed to lock onto mine, even from that distance. My heart raced, and I quickly closed the curtain, stepping back as if I'd been shocked. I called my dad's cell, but he didn't answer. I sent a message, but there was no reply. I spent the rest of the afternoon staring at the door, as if I expected him to knock any second. When night came, everything got worse. The silence in the house felt amplified, and the darkness outside made it seem like the man could be anywhere, not just by the fence. I made sure to lock all the doors and windows before heading upstairs to my room, trying to convince myself he must have left by now. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to every tiny sound in the house. But what came next wasn't something I could ignore. A tapping sound started at my bedroom window. 3 taps, then a pause. Another 3 taps. My hands went cold, and my breath caught in my chest. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands, but before I could call anyone, the tapping stopped. Gathering my courage, I looked out the window, but it was empty. Just my own terrified reflection staring back at me. I spent a few minutes trying to calm myself down, but every time I closed my eyes, the memory of those taps came back. I decided to check the backyard again. Grabbing a flashlight, I hesitated before heading downstairs toward the back door. Turning on the porch light, I almost dropped the flashlight. There were footprints. Not normal ones, but large, muddy footprints, clearly human, leading up to the living room window. I looked toward the fence, but the man was no longer there. The prints led to the side gate, which was wide open. I was absolutely sure I had locked that gate earlier. The fear wasn't just in my head anymore. It was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I ran back upstairs and locked my bedroom door. I wanted to believe he was gone, but my gut told me otherwise. Then, my phone buzzed. I thought it was my dad finally replying to my messages, but when I looked at the screen, my blood ran cold. It was an unknown number. The message read, "Nice place you have here. Mind if I stop by?" My heart pounded so hard, it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I took a deep breath and typed back quickly. "Who is this? How did you get my number?" The reply came almost instantly. "You left the kitchen door unlocked." Reflexively, I grabbed the nearest knife and went back downstairs, trying to ignore the fear that almost paralyzed me. But when I got to the kitchen, the door was locked. The message didn't make sense. I stood there trying to process it when my phone buzzed again. Another message. Did you really think I was only outside? My mind was racing. The idea that someone was inside with me was unbearable. I looked around the kitchen. Every shadow seemed darker, every corner deeper. It was like the house itself was alive, conspiring against me. I decided I needed to leave. Gripping the knife tighter, I took careful steps toward the front door. My hands shook so much I could barely turn the key. When I finally unlocked it, I threw the door open, expecting to see the empty street. But what I found was worse. On the porch sat a small wooden figure, something like a crude doll carved by hand. It had disproportionate arms and a distorted face with empty eyes that seemed to stare back at me. It was small, but it was so disturbing that my knees nearly buckled. I grabbed the doll, still holding the knife in my other hand, and threw it as far as I could into the yard. I was determined to get out of the house and find help, but before I could take another step, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated for a few seconds before looking, but I knew I had to. "Did you like the gift? There are more around." My heart felt like it was about to explode. I rushed back inside and locked the door. I ran up the stairs and locked myself in my room. I tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through. It was like I was completely cut off, trapped in my own house. I leaned against the door, trying to gather my thoughts. But before I could process anything, I heard something fall downstairs. It sounded like a chair tipping over, or something heavier. Every second that passed made the idea of going back downstairs seem more ridiculous. I stayed there, pressed against the door, listening closely. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. It was heavy, almost tangible, like something was waiting. I grabbed my phone again and tried calling my dad, but the call dropped before it could even ring. The next message hit me like a punch to the stomach. "I thought you were braver than this." That was it. I screamed, more out of frustration than anything else, a mix of fear and anger. I felt like a cornered animal. I decided to check the window in my room one more time. Looking down at the backyard, there was nothing. No movement, no new footprints. It was like the chaos from earlier had vanished, leaving only the feeling that something was deeply, deeply wrong. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They weren't rushed, but deliberate and heavy, as if the person wanted me to know exactly where they were. My entire body froze. Each step felt like it matched the pounding of my heart. I stared at the doorknob, waiting for it to turn at any second. I gripped the knife so tightly my fingers started to hurt. When the footsteps stopped, the silence returned. But it was even worse. Something was on the other side of the door. I could feel it. I gathered all the courage I could and yelled, "Who's there?" There was no answer. My phone buzzed again and I nearly dropped it. The message was short. "Open the door. I want to see you." My mind was spinning. Every part of me begged not to open that door, but at the same time, the idea of just sitting there and waiting terrified me even more. I looked around the room, trying to find something else to defend myself with, but aside from the knife, there was only a broken lamp and my closet. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. Maybe it was just someone messing with me. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But how could I explain the messages, the footprints, the doll? None of it made sense. My hands were sweating as I held the knife, still staring at the doorknob. I decided I wouldn't open it. If it really was someone, they'd have to break it down. But then the sound changed. It wasn't footsteps or knocking anymore. It was scratching, slow and deliberate, like long nails dragging against the wood. My entire body went cold. The scratching stopped abruptly, and then I heard a low, muffled laugh on the other side. It was worse than anything I could imagine. It didn't sound normal. It wasn't a human laugh. It was guttural, almost animalistic. That's it, I thought. I grabbed my phone and typed out the most frantic message of my life. "Whoever you are, I'm calling the cops now." I hit send, but there was no reply. Seconds later, my phone buzzed again with another message. "Call whoever you want. They won't get here in time." That was enough to break me. I decided to leave the room through the window. It opened onto the garage roof, and from there I could jump to the ground. It wasn't the safest plan, but it was my only option. I opened the window as quietly as possible, trying not to make any noise, but as I was about to climb out, I heard the doorknob start to turn slowly. My body was in full panic mode. Without thinking, I climbed out of the window and jumped onto the garage roof. The impact hurt my ankles, but I didn't stop. I ran across the roof and jumped into the yard, almost falling to my knees. I got up quickly and ran toward the side gate, ignoring the pain shooting up my legs. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what might be following me. My only goal was to get out of there and find help. When I reached the street, I looked around desperately, but everything was eerily quiet. No lights on in the neighboring houses, no cars passing by. I grabbed my phone again and called 911, and this time, the call finally went through. I explained everything as incoherently as possible, but begged them to send someone. While I waited, I hid behind a tree across the street, watching my house from a distance. Nothing seemed to move inside, but I knew something was wrong. Then I saw the living room light turn on, and a silhouette appeared in the window. It wasn't mine. The figure stood there for a moment, motionless, before the light went off again. My heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. A few minutes later, I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. 2 officers got out and walked toward the front door. I ran to them, explaining everything as quickly as I could. They told me to wait by the street while they checked the house. A few minutes later, they came back with puzzled expressions. "There's no one in there," one of them said. "All the doors and windows are locked. Are you sure about what you saw?" I tried arguing, explaining the messages, the footprints, the doll on the porch, but they didn't seem convinced. They took my phone and said they'd try to trace the number, but it was likely just a prank. I knew it wasn't. Nothing about this felt like a prank. One of the officers suggested I stay at a hotel or a friend's house for the night, since I was clearly shaken. I agreed immediately and called my uncle, who lived a few blocks away. While waiting for him, I sat on the curb, staring at the house. Even with the police there, I felt like something was still wrong. My uncle finally arrived and took me to his place. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that low laugh or imagined the tapping on the window. The next day, my parents came home, and I told them everything. My dad insisted on checking the house's security cameras, which were connected to an internal system. That's when something even more disturbing came up. The footage showed the man standing by the fence for hours, but it never recorded him entering or leaving the yard. Even stranger, the doll I had thrown into the grass never appeared in the footage. It was like none of it had ever happened, except for the messages on my phone, which were still there, real and undeniable. To this day, I have no idea what happened that night. I moved out of that house a few months later and never saw that man or received another message from the number again. But sometimes, I still get the feeling that I'm being watched, especially when the night is quieter than it should be. I always wonder, did he really leave? Or is he just waiting for the right time to come back? I never thought my divorce would lead me to such a quiet, almost frozen-in-time place like this suburban neighborhood. After years of dealing with the chaos of a crumbling marriage, I was finally alone, but in a way that felt liberating. My house was small but cozy, with a charming porch and a backyard that gave me the sense of peace I had been longing for. During the first few weeks, I focused on turning it into a home, arranging furniture, and establishing a routine just for myself. My life was simple: remote work, morning walks to clear my mind, and sometimes a coffee with the few neighbors I came across. It was the perfect fresh start, or so I thought. My first encounter with Mr. John, my elderly neighbor, was on the 3rd day after I moved in. He knocked on my door holding a plate of cookies and wearing a smile that seemed genuine. I thought it was kind, though a little odd since it wasn't something I was used to in the city. He looked like the typical retired man, bald, slightly hunched over, wearing a sweater that seemed decades old. We chatted for a few minutes. He asked why I had moved and complimented the fresh paint on the house. He was friendly, but I quickly noticed he had an overly curious nature, almost intrusive, as he asked detailed questions about my work schedule and whether I had visitors. It felt uncomfortable, but I brushed it off, thinking he was just a lonely old man. As the days went by, I noticed Mr. John's visits became more frequent. He would show up unannounced, always with some trivial excuse. Returning an envelope he claimed to have found in my mailbox, commenting on the weather, or asking if I had a tool he could borrow. I tried to remain polite. After all, he was just an elderly man trying to socialize, but it started to get on my nerves. One day, as I was watering the plants on my porch, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I looked to the side, and there he was, standing on the sidewalk, watching me. He raised his hand in a casual wave and made a comment about how quickly my flowers were growing. I forced a smile, but the feeling of being watched left me uneasy. Everything escalated one night when I was sitting on the couch watching TV, and noticed a shadow pass by my living room window. My heart raced as I got up, turned off the lights, and peeked through the curtain. There he was, Mr. John, standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, hands in his pockets, staring as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself he might just be out for a walk or looking at the stars. But he stood there for at least 10 minutes, completely still. Finally, I knocked on the window to show him I had seen him. He moved, gave a timid smile, and called out, "Just checking in, neighbor, to make sure you're okay." The whole situation gave me chills. After that night, fear began to creep in. I started taking precautions, closing all the windows at dusk, double-locking the door, and avoiding any interaction that could extend a conversation with Mr. John. Yet he always found a way to insert himself into my routine. Once, I came home and found a bag of fresh vegetables on my doorstep with a note saying, "From my garden to your table." I tried to thank him from a distance, but he showed up right away and started talking as if we were old friends. The way he mentioned specific details about my day, like the time I went for a walk or the type of music I listened to while working, was unsettling. How did he know all of this? Things got even stranger when I realized he had an obsession with watching me. One afternoon, while working in my makeshift home office in the living room, I noticed movement outside the window. I peeked out and saw him again, crouched near the fence as if trying to get a better view inside. My first instinct was to open the door and confront him, but as soon as he realized I had spotted him, he walked away quickly, pretending not to notice me. My whole body trembled, but I took a deep breath and tried convincing myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was tending to his garden or looking for something he'd dropped. Even so, the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. That night, the fear became overwhelming. I decided I needed to cut off all contact with Mr. John. I didn't want to be rude, but it was clear something was wrong. I started ignoring the knocks on my door, pretending I wasn't home when he came by. Yet, he seemed to notice. One early morning, I woke up to a noise coming from the backyard. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone to call the police. But before dialing, I worked up the courage to peek out my bedroom window. There he was, illuminated by my porch light, holding a flashlight and staring directly at my back door. The scene was so absurd that I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. The next morning, I went straight to his house to confront him. I knocked loudly, and he took a while to answer, as if surprised by my visit. When I asked what he was doing in my backyard in the middle of the night, he smiled, that same timid smile, and said, "I thought I heard something strange and wanted to make sure you were safe." My anger grew, but he seemed so calm and confident that I started doubting myself. Still, I made it clear that I didn't want him near my house again. He nodded, agreeing, but something in his eyes, a strange, almost defiant glint, left me deeply unsettled. The next few days were eerily quiet. I didn't see Mr. John lurking around my house, and for a moment I thought my warning had worked. But the relief didn't last long. One day, when I returned from the grocery store, I noticed my front door was unlocked. I froze, trying to remember if I had forgotten to lock it, but I was certain I hadn't. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out for anyone, but there was no response. Everything seemed normal until I saw something that made my blood run cold. A black notebook sitting on my living room table that wasn't mine. When I opened it, the pages were filled with detailed notes about me. Every page described precise details of my routine. 8 a.m., she went for a walk, wore a blue shirt. 12 p.m., lunch on the patio, listening to classical music. The dates went back to the day I moved in and continued up to the current week. At the end of the notebook, I found something even more disturbing. Notes about my life before I moved to this neighborhood. My old address, the name of the company I worked for before the divorce, even the restaurant I used to frequent with my ex-husband. I couldn't comprehend how he knew all this. That's when the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. He had been watching me long before I moved here. My immediate reaction was to run outside and call the police. My hands shook so much that I could barely hold my phone while explaining the situation. They told me to stay calm and that an officer would be dispatched to my house. As I waited, every sound felt magnified. The wind rustling the trees, the creak of the gate, even my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. I explained everything, showed them the notebook, and pointed them toward Mr. John's house. They promised to investigate but advised me to stay elsewhere for the night, just to be safe. The next morning, the police called me. They had questioned Mr. John, but he denied everything. Without concrete evidence beyond the notebook, there wasn't much they could do. The strangest part was that when they searched his house, it was completely empty. He had vanished overnight, leaving behind only a stack of unsent letters on the table. One of them was addressed to me. With trembling hands, I read it. It was a short but chilling message. "You're special. I always knew you'd end up here." Even weeks later, I couldn't shake the unease. I moved again, this time to another city, and installed cameras in every corner of my new house. Still, I can't stop looking over my shoulder. I don't know where he is now or what he wanted from me, but I know he knew things no one else could have known. And to this day, whenever I see a new neighbor, I can't help but wonder if I'm being watched again. I had just moved into that apartment about 3 months ago. It was a tall building, the kind you see in any big city, with endless hallways and neighbors who pass by without even glancing your way. I worked downtown, so the location was perfect. But my routine was so hectic that I barely enjoyed the place. I'd come home late, usually carrying grocery bags, and collapse on the couch. That specific night, I remember being especially exhausted. I had just gotten out of the shower and wrapped myself in a robe when I heard the knocks at the door. They weren't timid knocks like someone unsure. They were strong, impatient, the kind that makes your heart jump for no reason. I opened the door with one hand still holding my wet hair and came face to face with a man in his 40s wearing a beige uniform with a logo embroidered on the chest. He looked legitimate, but something about him felt off. Maybe it was his smile, too wide, or the way his eyes lingered on me for just a second longer than they should have. "Good evening. I'm from maintenance. We're checking for a possible leak on this floor. I need to take a look at your plumbing." The first thing that crossed my mind was, but nobody mentioned this. Still, the guy seemed so at ease, like it was just another day at work. I hesitated, holding the door halfway open, but I didn't want to make a scene. I sighed, stepped back, and let him in. He walked straight to the kitchen, like he already knew where everything was. I followed him, still clutching the robe tightly with one hand, and leaned against the doorway as he crouched down to open the cabinet under the sink. "Everything looks fine here, but I'll need to check the bathroom too," he said, without even looking at me. His tone was neutral, almost robotic, but something didn't feel right. The uniform was too clean, without the wear and tear you'd expect from someone working maintenance all day. And he wasn't carrying any tools, just a clipboard that looked more like a prop than something useful. I followed him to the bathroom, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. He opened the cabinet under the sink, stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then started tapping on the walls inside, as if searching for something. "Do you live here alone?" he asked, and my stomach sank. I tried to mask my discomfort and answered with a curt, "Yes." But the way he nodded, as if filing that information away, made me uneasy. After a few more minutes, he stood up and said everything was in order. Without looking at me, he headed straight for the door, thanked me, and left, leaving his clipboard on the kitchen counter. When I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole thing had been wrong. Over the next few days, I tried to brush it off. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that it had been nothing more than a guy doing his job, no matter how strange it seemed. But then I started noticing things out of place. First, it was the coffee maker, sitting on the opposite counter from where I always kept it. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I had moved it without remembering. Then it was the cabinet door in the kitchen, which I always kept shut, but found slightly ajar in the morning. The breaking point came when I found a black lighter on the coffee table. I don't smoke, never have, and I don't have visitors. What was that lighter doing there? I decided to check the building's security cameras, but that led to another shock. There weren't any cameras in the hallways. Not on my floor, not on any floor. The best the building had was an old camera in the lobby, but even that didn't help because it only caught the faces of people entering or leaving. I called the building management and asked about the leak inspection. The woman on the other end of the line sounded confused. She said there hadn't been any maintenance called recently and that any scheduled inspections were always announced in advance. At that moment, it felt like the ground fell out from under me. That phone call sent my mind racing. Who was that man? And more importantly, what did he want? I decided to search the apartment thoroughly. I started in the kitchen, opening every cabinet and checking corners I'd usually ignore. Nothing. I moved to the bathroom, doing the same, pulling back products on shelves and looking for anything out of place. It was in the bedroom that I finally found something. Behind the bedside lamp, carefully hidden, was a small black device about the size of a key fob. It had a tiny lens. It was a camera. My heart started pounding. He wasn't from maintenance. He had come in to plant that. I tried to stay calm as I removed the camera and placed it on the table. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Confront the building management again? While I debated, I decided to examine the device further. Using a pair of tweezers, I opened a small flap on the back and found a memory card. I inserted the card into my computer, and what I found sent chills down my spine. There weren't just recordings of my apartment, but also of other places, probably other apartments. The camera seemed to have been used before it got to me. Each video showed a different person in vulnerable moments, as if it were some twisted game for whoever was behind it. My stomach churned as I watched the videos. I quickly recognized my apartment in a few recordings, capturing mundane moments. Me on the couch, scrolling through my phone, or fixing my hair in front of the mirror. The thought that someone had been watching me without my knowledge was almost unbearable. But when I realized that some videos featured other people, my fear turned into full-blown panic. I recognized the entryway of one of my neighbors at the start of one recording. It showed a middle-aged woman sitting on her couch, completely unaware of what was happening. She looked just as vulnerable as I felt. I decided I couldn't handle this alone. I called the police and explained everything, from the supposed maintenance man to the hidden camera. They asked me not to touch anything else and to send them the videos while a team was dispatched to my apartment. The wait was unbearable. Every sound in the hallway made my heart race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the man could come back at any moment. I closed all the curtains, locked the door, and sat in the kitchen, clutching a knife, just in case. I'd never felt so exposed. The police arrived about an hour later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, were serious but tried to reassure me. I explained everything again, this time in greater detail, while one of them began inspecting the apartment. They took the device and memory card for analysis and promised to update me as soon as they had any news. While they were there, I felt a small sense of safety, but it didn't last long. When the door closed behind them, the silence in the apartment felt more oppressive than ever. I couldn't tell if I was being paranoid, but it felt like something was still wrong with the place. The next morning, I received a call from the police. They confirmed that the man wasn't a maintenance worker, and that the device they found was being analyzed further. I asked if they had identified him or figured out how he got in, but they didn't have any clear answers yet. Change your locks and, if possible, think about moving out as soon as you can, the female officer advised. That only heightened my anxiety. It felt like she knew something she wasn't telling me. I couldn't focus on work that day. I spent the entire time staring out the window or checking the front door every half hour. That night, as I tried to convince myself that everything was under control, I heard knocking at the door again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't firm and impatient like before. It was soft, almost hesitant. My heart started racing, and I froze for a few seconds. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight app, cautiously approaching the door. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I took a deep breath and stepped back, convincing myself that my imagination was playing tricks on me. But then, seconds later, the knocking came again. This time, louder. That was the first moment I felt true terror about being in that apartment. I immediately called the police, stammering as I tried to explain the situation. They said they'd send someone, but it might take a while. While I waited, I locked myself in the bathroom, clutching my phone tightly. That's when I heard heavy footsteps outside, accompanied by a low scraping noise, like someone dragging something across the wood of the door. Then, complete silence. I stayed in the bathroom until I heard police sirens outside. When I finally stepped out to let them in, there was no one in the hallway, but on the door were scratch marks and what looked like a strange symbol drawn in chalk. The officers were just as baffled as I was when they saw the symbol. It looked crude, as if someone had drawn it in a hurry, but it was clearly intentional. They took photos and asked me if I recognized it or had seen anything like it before. I shook my head, but the whole thing only made me feel more targeted. One of the officers suggested it could be some kind of message, but he didn't elaborate. He just said I should leave the apartment for a few nights until things were sorted out. I didn't argue. That same night, I stayed at a friend's house, but I couldn't sleep. Every noise in her house made me jump. My hands trembled as I held my phone, frantically searching for information about strange symbols or similar incidents. I found nothing that explained what was happening to me, but I read horrifying stories of people being stalked for weeks, even months, without ever finding out why. That's when the paranoia really hit me. Was this man still watching me somehow? Did he have more cameras hidden? Or maybe something even worse? The next morning, I returned to my apartment with a security technician I hired at the last minute. He brought equipment that looked like it was straight out of a spy movie, capable of detecting hidden devices. We combed through every inch of the apartment, and it was in the bedroom that we found another device. This time, it was a microphone, even smaller than the camera, hidden inside a tiny hole in the baseboard. When the technician showed it to me, my blood ran cold. He explained that this type of device only worked at short range, meaning whoever was using it was likely in the building, maybe even on my floor. After he left, I decided to take the officer's advice and start looking for a new place to live. The thought of staying there, knowing the man could still be nearby, was unbearable. Over the next few days, I spent most of my time packing my things, avoiding being in the apartment at night whenever possible. But even with plans to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was like something, or someone, was always lurking, observing, waiting for the right moment to act. Deep down, I knew that leaving the apartment wouldn't solve everything, but it felt like my only chance to move on. On the last day before moving out, something happened that made me realize I might never get answers for what I went through. As I packed the last of my belongings, I found something that wasn't mine. A small envelope, hidden inside one of the kitchen cabinets, which I only noticed because I'd removed a shelf. Inside was a single photo taken from outside the building with my apartment highlighted. In the photo, the light in my living room was on, and I could see my own silhouette in the window. The most terrifying part? The photo didn't look recent. It was as if someone had been watching me since the moment I moved in. I gave the photo to the police and left that place the next day, never to return. Despite their promises to investigate, I never got any concrete updates. I changed my number, blocked unknown people from accessing my social media, and started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. Even in my new apartment, in a completely different neighborhood, I still wake up in the middle of the night at the slightest noise. I don't know who that man was or what he wanted, and maybe I never will. I just hope that whoever or whatever it was stayed behind in that apartment.